Hey, what it do, J Crew? It's your girl Jasmine, and I'm back with another video. So welcome or welcome back. I am a 5th year PhD candidate in psychology and social personality, community psychology, and digital/internet social media studies. And today I'm going to be talking about qualitative data analysis and qualitative research in general. So if you are a student, a researcher, someone who's curious, someone who uses it, regardless, I hope that this introduction video is helpful. I will also be doing a Q&A with questions that you all asked me over on my Instagram at Jazz the PhD student. So let's get right into it. So today the goal is for me to just do a quick introduction to qualitative data analysis and qualitative research, what it is, how I use it in my research, and answering some general questions that you all had. So qualitative data analysis in the broadest stroke is about analyzing and making sense of data that is non-numerical. So this can include things like focus group data, interview data, social media posts. It could also include things like online interactions. It could also include things like TikTok videos, comments, basically anything that doesn't have numbers and is about meaning rather than numbers. You can perform something like qualitative data analysis. So unlike quantitative analysis that seeks to make sense of numbers using things like statistical patterns and analysis, qualitative data seeks to ask deeper questions and gain deeper insights. So it will ask questions and tries to gain insights on things like, how do people experience this phenomenon? How do people make meaning of this? How do people make sense of their lives? How do people understand what's happening to them? How do power, identity, culture shape their experiences? What meanings do people assign to different aspects? So for example, in my dissertation into Black digital culture, one of the things that I ask participants in my focus groups is to share with me, how do you identify something online as racialized? How do you know something online is Black? So things like that. So I ask them questions, and with qualitative data analysis, what I do is analyze their responses and the responses that they have amongst themselves in the focus group context. There are a lot of ways to collect qualitative data, like I already talked about in the first part, and a lot of times, if you are somebody who is in your dissertation or conducting research, the primary ways that people do collect qualitative data is through open-ended questions on a survey or through interviews and focus groups. So interviews can be one-on-one interviews. Interviews can be something that happens in a group setting called focus groups, where me and the interviewer could be interviewing several people about a topic at one time. There are also various types of interviews that can be done. Other ways to collect qualitative data is to do something like data scraping. So this would mean, for example, on social media platforms, this would mean for me to go through social media. For example, if I'm trying to study a specific hashtag, this would mean collecting all of the videos relevant to my video for a certain time point and then analyzing the videos using that hashtag. And qualitative data analysis is not limited to just textual analysis. This can also be done with videos as well as audio, as well as songs, lyrics, anything that is not numbers you can conduct qualitative data analysis with, basically. So given that this is just an introduction video, I'm not going to spend too much time on what qualitative data analysis is, but basically qualitative data is not numbers. Think words, think feelings, think emotions, think visuals, okay? Now we're going to talk about, how do we analyze qualitative data analysis? This is the part that is the most tricky for most people who do qualitative analysis. Because in order to analyze qualitative data analysis, it depends on so many things. It depends on your discipline, it depends on your paradigms, it depends on your theories, your methods, which is different than your methodologies, which we can get into in another video. So there's so many things that your analysis will depend on. And there are various ways. So the first way, the most common way, is to do something called a thematic analysis, which means to look through whatever qualitative data you have and identifying patterns and themes, recurring patterns, recurring themes that you notice in these. There's also various forms of thematic analysis, such as reflexive thematic analysis, that people will perform for things that are more reflexive. These are meaning things that are more related to people's explicit experiences. And this is a method that you would take when you're trying to understand something that is more subjective. As again, because there's so many different types of qualitative data that exist, there are obviously different types of ways to analyze it. So thematic analysis is great for things like textual analysis. But what do we do when we're trying to understand more about the spoken and written language? Well, then we can perform something like discourse analysis, which focuses specifically on what is said, meaning focusing more on the nuances of language as opposed to just what is said and what is not said. And then we have something called grounded theory, which is a approach that you would take if you're trying to develop theory, but you can't develop theory from thin air, so you need to go into the qualitative analysis with the understanding that you have an idea about theory, you kind of generally understand how things work, you have an idea of how things work, and now you're trying to see if this idea about a phenomenon is supported via the data. Again, we can get into it if that's something you're interested in. So in my research, I use a mixture of methods depending on what the subject is. So for example, in my interviews with Black women and their experiences with online dating, that study, I took a reflexive thematic analysis to analyze those interviews because I really wanted to understand women's experiences when it came to the dating process and how this impacted how they view themselves, their well-being, and their relationship to technology. So given this is a lot to do with their own experiences, I really wanted to be reflexive, meaning I wanted to be open to their subjective experiences, and the reflexivity means accounting for my own biases and things that could influence the way that I ask questions, influence the way that I analyze these data, these interviews. So yeah, and that method also helped me account for the history of Black women's relationships to technology, the history of dating apps, the history of dating violence in general. So now that we've talked about a few general, very broad stroke approaches to analyzing qualitative data, you're probably wondering, well, once I have the data, I have like hours and hours and hours of transcripts or like 30,000 tweets, what do I do with it? You may ask. Well, this is where software really comes in, and this is really where technological advances really played a huge role for contemporary scholars like myself, because there are coding software such as NVivo, Atlas, MAXQDA, to name a few, and there's other ones like Deduce. There's so many of them out there. But basically these programs are software that helps you organize, manage, and analyze your data, and they can help you collaborate with other people. So instead of you having like hours and hours of transcripts and interviews just in a random Google Doc or Word doc, you can organize, you can code, you can analyze all of your data in here. And some programs have different capabilities. So some allow you to analyze video data or textual data as well as tweets, whereas some others may have AI or other cool things that you can do with it. And there are free options, but a lot of these are paid. But if you're a student or a researcher and you're affiliated with the university, a lot of times your school will have a license for something like NVivo, which I'm not a fan of. We can talk about that later. But if you're somebody who's getting into qualitative research, I highly, highly recommend you use a software of any sort before you even get started, because otherwise it'll be really hard to keep up with. So now I'm going to talk a bit about how I engage in qualitative data analysis. And for this, I'm going to talk about my dissertation project. So my dissertation project occurred over several years, because when this project started, I did not realize this is going to be my dissertation, because at the time it was just a small grant that I got from the library, which then grew and grew and grew and became my dissertation. So my dissertation is two projects, the first being a focus group study, the second being a large-scale survey. So the first one is already complete, and that's the part that I'm going to focus on. So what I did was I had this idea. I wanted to understand how Black users engage in meaning-making processes around race online and how this impacts well-being. So what I did was literature review, obviously figure out what has already been done in the field, and then I wrote a research proposal and come up with a list of questions that I want to ask people in the focus groups, yada 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 yada, the background, and then the time came for me to conduct said focus groups. And now I personally hate the perception that focus groups, interviews, qualitative data collection is very easy because you're just talking to people, which is not the case, because I've definitely been in situations where people have done really bad job interviewing. But basically my role in this focus group was to facilitate. So I asked the questions, but I also asked follow-up questions, because obviously I knew the type of questions that I had and I wanted to know more about certain things. So I asked these questions, facilitated the conversations, and I had 5 focus groups. So after the focus groups were completed, they were completed on Zoom, luckily, and at this time Zoom had the transcripts and they were not clean. So what I had done was my RAs and I sat down and listened to the audio as well as reading the transcripts and cleaned the data. What this means is anything that did not align with what was actually said on the transcripts, we matched the transcripts so that it reflected what participants actually said. Now this, for 5 focus groups that were about an hour to an hour and a half each, took a long time, but much shorter than it would if we had not had any transcripts. So after cleaning the data, then I imported the data into NVivo. And at this time, I started with NVivo because it was the free option. And in NVivo, what I started to do was read the transcripts. Though I was the person who conducted it, it had been a while, it had been several months. So the first step is to read the transcripts. Familiarize yourself with the transcripts and take notes. And what this means is anything that stands out to you. Things that were interesting, things that were weird, things that I was like, what is she talking about? Things that I had thoughts about, things that I thought was funny, things that were weird, things that were crazy, things that somebody else talked about in another group, I took notes of. And then in NVivo, this is called a memo. I took memos of everything. And the thing to remember when you start this process is you should document everything and keep that organized. So what I did was I had all of my analysis organized in phases, and this was like phase 0. This was familiarizing myself with the data. And what I did for this was reflexive thematic analysis. So this was step 1. And then step 2, so for my dissertation, I did a reflexive thematic analysis. I'm going to walk through that really quick. So step 1 was familiarizing myself with all of the transcripts so I knew what was going on and memoing. Step 2 was the open/initial coding. What this meant is as I was reading through the transcripts again, and this is a process I took with the other interviewer who also conducted the interviews, who was there, and she had questions in this, and we analyzed these together. So anything that stood out, anything that I've read as a code, anything that kind of answered the research question that I just spoke about, I coded it. And at this stage, the codes were very broad, very basic, so it would be something like family influences one's identity. Something like that, friends, racial socialization influences. Something like that, things that was like, okay, I'm starting to notice something here. Did that for the full transcript. And then what you would do with your other coder, if there is one, is you would come together and discuss the codes. You start to recognize, oh yeah, we noticed these. I noticed that code too. And then you discuss the codes and you start to combine them. So if me and the other coder started to see, okay, we had this one, we all just named them different things. Okay, maybe this should be one code together. Okay, cool. So in this meeting, we then condense our codes from like 50, 60 to like 30. Okay, cool. Now we use these 30 codes, go back to the transcripts and try to code the transcripts with said 30 codes. And we repeat this process until we feel that we have a solid set of codes. And then at this point, it depends on where you are at with your research. This is the part where it kind of gets tricky depending on for you. But for me, because I had hours and hours of interviews, I just wanted to focus on one question at a time. So I did not analyze for every question I had. So for this one question, we got down to about 10 codes for the question. And we said, okay, cool. These are pretty solid codes. Yeah. So then we created the code book, and then we rallied up our other RAs and we started all coding the same interview together, the same focus group together. We started with one, and then we added focus groups as we went. And then eventually we did all of them. And at that point we started to recognize the patterns, and going from code to theme is also complicated, but again, depends on your research group, depends on the theories, the paradigm, all of that. But for us, we discussed this as a group. We said these codes are leading themselves to this upper level theme that encompasses these codes. Let's see if these make sense. So then from there we generated these themes and we said, yeah, these are actually reflective. Let's double check. So then we would check and see if these themes were reflected in our data. And then from there we had our finalized themes. And then from that point on, I wrote this up, presented it, yada, yada, yada. And then the rest was history, and then it became a dissertation, and now it looks completely different. So I started out with NVivo, but now I use MAXQDA because I do find it much easier. The interface is smoother, it's prettier, and it's a lot more intuitive. It's easier to share files with other people, it's easier for me to organize. So yeah, I tried the NVivo Cloud collaboration, and it was just not it. It was not it for me. That was such a ramble. Hopefully that made sense. Let me know what I could do better with. The reason why I haven't made any of these videos is because I just don't know if I'm making sense or if I'm just confusing people. But anyways, I'm gonna get to the questions that you all asked me on Instagram, and I'm gonna try and answer them in the order that I guess makes sense. First one is, what is your method for the first pass at coding? So this is a great question. So the method that I take on my first pass of coding is to be pretty broad and pretty heavy-handed. And what I mean by that is, because the data that I've had have been interviews or focus groups, so it's a lot of data, I usually don't want to do the first pass multiple times. So when I'm going through, I try to code things very broadly, but very heavy-handedly, meaning even if it's something that I think might be tangentially related to something, I will code it. And this also helps me because then I start to see my own thinking pattern and I can combine codes. It's a lot easier to combine codes than it is to go back and add more codes later. So that's usually the method I take. And the second question is organizing data, because I'm all over the place. I definitely resonate with this a lot, and I've been trying to be a lot more intentional about my data management and data practices in general. And something that has been pretty helpful is for me to just front load this. And I know that that's like so daunting, so obvious at the same time, but what I mean by that is to anonymize my data ASAP before I send it to anybody, before I do any analysis on it, which you should do anyways, and then make backups immediately before I do anything with it. And then if they're interviews, if they're focus groups, name them, number them in the title, right? So whatever 1 through 20, because once you get it into an analysis environment, it's going to be a lot easier if you can see the numbers versus the names of the interviewer, the interviewee, or the name of the focus groups, you know? So that helps keep organized. Another way is to also just like have separate folders for the data. So like, don't put your data, the raw data, where you put your analysis, if that makes sense. I don't know, but that's just like some of the ways. But I haven't figured it out myself, but those are some of the things that has helped me more recently. Another question is, discuss other methods besides inter-rater reliability. This is a great question. So inter-rater reliability is necessary if the method and the paper and the data requires it and if it makes sense. So you can definitely do a qualitative data analysis on your own without the need for inter-rater reliability. I think the thing with qualitative data analysis is, as long as you're able to justify the decisions that you make and it's a sound decision, you can do what makes sense to you. And the other question is how to write a perfect introduction and conclusion. I actually don't have an answer for this because I don't know myself, but a good introduction is one that tells you what the paper is, it's intriguing, it tells you what the field is missing, what you're doing, and what you find, and why this is necessary. A conclusion tells you what was missing, what you did, and why this is impactful, and what should be done next, I think. I'm starting with NVivo for coding interviews. Any tips, suggestions to get up to speed? Use another program if you can. And if you have to use NVivo, I would recommend sticking to one version. So they have a bunch of versions, 12, 13, 14, 15. And I know that different universities have different license for different versions, but they change, and different versions have different features that make it difficult if you are switching between them. So definitely stick to the same version, as well as stick to either Mac or Windows. They're different. Just stick to Mac or Windows. Do not switch between. Also, the other thing I would recommend is organizing your analysis in different folders. That really helped me. So I'll show you all, like I have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 analysis, and those phases for me aligned with each step of the thematic analysis. So that helped me organize each step, and I'm able to like I'm able to see clearly what I did in phase 1 for each thing. And that does require like copy and pasting all the things you did in 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. But I didn't mind because that helped me keep track, and I can see everything that I did in each step while still progressing, but also being able to track my own work. Hopefully that's helpful. Somebody said, what about Deduce? I've never used Deduce. Personally, I don't think that the interface would be something I like. I've heard great things about it, but the old Windows interface I don't think would work for me. Also, I've heard it's slow. I'm not sure though. So let me know if you have used it and what you think. Would you jump on a qualitative project outside of your expertise? If asked, I would, because I do feel I am gaining my expertise in qualitative analysis, qualitative research, and I think that that in itself is a skill. So I don't think that I need to know the area intimately to know how to apply the methods. Then how to start your own project and to publish it. This is a great question. I think it's something that's very difficult, and it's not always taught well, especially at grad school, because you're kind of expected to come in and to like work with your advisor, and you know, you're just supposed to just know things. For me, what really helped is getting my own grants. That helped me have my own source of funding, but the grants that I've been a part of have had a lot of resources, such as like organizing your data, such as managing funding, how to write, how to publish, those type of things. Also, like, you have to make time for your own research, or else your time will get eaten up by other things that are not even related to your research, and that's what happens to me a lot. So you have to be mindful about your time, and also you have to ask help. You have to ask for help. You have to go to your library, go to your university resources, go to your advisors. It doesn't really matter who specifically you go to if they're helpful, but you have to ask for help, because otherwise, yeah. So those are basically a very, very super broad strokes introduction to qualitative data analysis, qualitative research. And I realized that this was super vague because I just wanted to introduce it and to talk about it a bit for those who may not be familiar with it. But I do want to do more, so please let me know what would be helpful to see from me. Any questions that you have, any topics that you want to learn more about. But yeah, so drop those down below. Let me know if you have any other thoughts, comments, and concerns, and I will see you on my next video. Bye.